This is episode 411 of That Shakespeare Life.
Hi, I'm Miriam Bibby, equine historian, writer and editor. Another great method for studying the life of William Shakespeare includes listening to this. It's That Shakespeare Life with my friend, Cassidy Cash.
Welcome to That Shakespeare Life with Cassidy Cash. Cassidy believes that if you desire to successfully learn or perform Shakespeare's plays, then understanding the real life and history of William Shakespeare himself is a must. That Shakespeare Life is the podcast that helps you go beyond the curtain of some of Shakespeare's most iconic works and explore the world of early modern England as Shakespeare would have lived it, learning from the writers, historians, and performers who know it best. And now, here's Cassidy.
In Shakespeare's play Julius Caesar, the soothsayer immortalizes the warning, "Beware the Ides of March." Since then, we've joked about March being dangerous, and we've blamed the 15th of the month for any variety of events we should have seen coming, all due to this warning from the soothsayer on Shakespeare's stage. However, for many of us, we don't actually know what the Ides are, why are they occurring in March, and what was Shakespeare invoking when he included them in the play? Would it even have made sense for Julius Caesar, the actual Roman, to have been afraid of this time of year? To explore the full history behind this phrase and finally understand why people have been scared of the middle of March for over 400 years, we are delighted to welcome our guest, Jörg Rüpke, to the show. Jörg is a German professor of comparative religion and classical philology, who is also the author of the book On Roman Religion and Pantheon, which explores the history of the Ides of March. And today he's here to share that history with you. Before we dive into our conversation, I want to quickly remind you that members of That Shakespeare Life can explore visual history extras while you listen to the show. You can unlock period artifacts, paintings, woodcuts, and more in-depth history related to the Ides of March by clicking Access the Extras on our episode page. This week, our episode can be found at CassidyCash.com/EP405. And now, let's dive into the history. Hello, Jörg. Welcome to That Shakespeare Life.
Thank you very much for having me.
What did the Ides actually mean to an ordinary Roman in Caesar's time? Was it just a date marker, or did it carry a ritual or even maybe superstitious associations in daily life that Shakespeare's audience would have recognized?
Every month, the Ides were certainly a very important day, a day of merrymaking. The most prominent festival of the month would typically be celebrated on the Ides. People would perhaps celebrate their birthday on the Ides, so as one of these festive days. There were hardly any beliefs connected to this, so it was certainly not an ominous day. It was rather like the calends were originally seen as the day of the new moon. The Ides were the day of the full moon, and this was not any longer the case in the time of Caesar, the 1st century BCE, but there were ritual traces of that. So there was a consciousness that this was a special day.
Obviously, the Roman calendar was no longer in use by the time Shakespeare was writing. So when was the Ides of March for the 16th and 17th century England? How would someone of Renaissance Europe have interpreted what is coming from the Roman calendar dates?
It was about in the 13th century that people start to number the dates of the month. So, 1st of April, 2nd of May, or 28th of October. But this was for a long time down into the 16th century, alongside this ancient Roman dating system where you have the calends as the first day of the month and you count towards those, and you have the Ides, and again you count, so it's the 4th day before the Ides, the day before the Ides. And in many calendars, still in the 16th century, that would be present, perhaps not so much in the daily practice of people, but at least in religious context. If they open the Common Book of Prayer, they would see there the Ides being marked. And there was one, perhaps I may add this, one important element of the calendar of the year where you need this special counting, and this was in intercalatory years, because the intercalation was done according to the old Roman practice, that is in February. you would not intercalate the 29th February, the last day of the month, but what you actually would do is to double the 6th day before the new calends. So you have the bisextilis. So there is a bit of technicality related to this, which would keep this knowledge. There is another way of counting instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, still on people's minds.
In Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, the character of the soothsayer, he immortalizes this phrase, beware the Ides of March. Were people in Shakespeare's lifetime holding the 15th of March as a suspicious date or something akin to Friday the 13th? Or did Shakespeare by himself sort of imbue this date with this kind of thing we should be afraid of?
I think that the role of Shakespeare in producing the ominous character of the day is larger than any previous knowledge. So, people historically minded would have known that this is the day of the killing of Caesar, but in general, belief in popular practice or in elite practice, that was not a specific ominous day at all. There were other days, but these were typically either related to 1st May, Midsummer's Day, or specific Christian holidays, the eve of All Saints' Day, Halloween, for instance. Certainly not the Ides of March. That was a historical date, I think immortalized in a way by Shakespeare's Julius Caesar.
So they would have known it was the 15th of March. The Ides of March was the 15th, but they didn't really associate it with being a scary time of year until after Shakespeare.
Yes, that's what they should have known, and many would have known. Nothing else would come along with that.
What kinds of domestic rituals would an elite household like Caesar's have observed before a major public appearance? I'm thinking about Calpurnia's dream in the play, and then there's sacrifices that are also performed. Are these historically accurate to the Roman time period they're designed to portray?
I think we must be very careful here. And if you take a look into the ancient sources, you see quite different takes on this. So we know about Caesar's killing from a rather short, dry account in Suetonius. We know of his contemporary, so also beginning of the 2nd century Christian era, Appianus, a Greek who had a very elaborate narrative of this event. And then there is Plutarch, roughly again the same period, perhaps slightly 10, 20 years earlier, who has again a different take on the event. Also, many details are like, but they differ very much in what they say about these omina, certainly drawing on earlier collections. And here we have to differentiate between what is produced in these narratives, what is political, so administrative rituals, like taking a small sacrifice before the start of a Senate's meeting, and what would people do individually. And people would individually, and here it's what people can do but need not do, is to certainly check the calendar to see whether this is an ominous date, like the day after the Ides. That was by many people seen as, not a good date to start something, or they would have some basic astrological knowledge that was very popular, started to be popular in the time of Caesar, and later on people would have elite people would have their private astrologer, just as Caesar is in very close touch to this Spurina, who tells him, beware, told him 1 month before on the Lupercalia, be aware for the next 30 days before the Ides of March that something bad can happen to you. This mixture is not differentiated on the stage of Shakespeare.
But the Romans did have a superstition around the day. So Shakespeare's being somewhat historically accurate to have the Romans having this day as being a point at which bad things could occur.
I mean, Shakespeare is very, very attentive and careful reproducing his sources. So that he does not, in this regard, he does not invent anything. And but it's in his sources already. It's a mixture of this, storytelling about big omina, forecasting big events of religious practices they actually did before starting a Senate's meeting, which is the setting in which Caesar was killed, and individual beliefs, which were very widespread. Suetonius, in his biography of Caesar's successor, that is the Emperor Augustus, is pointing out for whole chapters about all his different beliefs, precautious measures he took.
Shakespeare never gives stage directions about costume, but we have to think his audience would have needed some kind of visual cue to distinguish these characters as being recognizably Romans. Would Elizabethan playgoers have had a picture of men in togas with laurel wreaths on their head, or would a Roman on the 16th century stage have looked more like an Elizabethan statesman from Italy? I mean, how does the imagined image compare with what the real Julius Caesar and his contemporaries would have worn to the Curia of Pompey in 44 BC?
Yeah, I think we are in a way spoiled by the 19th century historic paintings, and which are so carefully reproduced by all the films about antiquity we see, and now more and more informed also by archaeological findings. In the 16th century, people would not really know what Romans look like. There were very few, statues, reliefs available, all without color. So this visual shorthand, so immediately informing the audience, this is a man, an artisan, this is a member of the elite, this is the head of state, would be done through the costumes of the day, the conventions of the day, in clothing, in color, and only very occasionally then a diadem, a laurel wreath, or maybe even occasionally a toga. So elements that are referred to in texts would be added, not replacing these, but basically they would see people from their own period on the stage and could thus easily decode who is there in which role and in which social level.
If you enjoy learning about the history of William Shakespeare and you want to go one step further to really experience the history for yourself, then consider joining Experience Shakespeare. This premium tier on Patreon lets you go behind the curtain and get hands-on with your history, trying out games, recipes, and crafts straight from the life of William Shakespeare. All of these activities are ones you can complete at home or in your classroom. And as a special bonus for joining our community of history lovers, you also get access to our exclusive library of virtual tours, animated plays, printable history guides, and special discounts on all the items in That Shakespeare Life shop. If you are ready to go beyond just learning and start experience Shakespeare's history for yourself, then join us today at patreon.com/thatshakespearelife and click on Experience Shakespeare. I'll see you inside. And now, back to the show. Historically, Caesar was assassinated in the Curia of Pompey, and ancient accounts describe him falling at the feet of Pompey's statue, a detail that Shakespeare leaves out entirely, instead setting the scene at, quote, the Capitol. Why do you think Shakespeare chose to shift the location and imagery? Was this simply a matter of what his Elizabethan audience would recognize, or does it tell us something about how Romans and power itself were imagined in early modern England?
I definitely think that it's the latter. I mean, Shakespeare being so careful in following his sources and makes changes very consciously. I mean, this is the one date about the location that is so clear. I mean, there is no discrepancy in the sources whatsoever. So this is a deliberate choice. And I think like these signals of clothing, it's saying, capital, this is what people know. So this is why everything is transferred to the capital. And in the story itself, there is the historical agents brought the capital in by immediately running to the capital after the killing of Caesar to announce there the liberation, the tyrant is dead, tyrannicide has been performed. So even there is this knowledge about the value, the symbolic value of the capital. And I think this is exactly the meaning on which Shakespeare capitalizes by choosing the capital as the place to situate all this, and not to explain his audience what the Curia of Pompey was. I mean, a building that was basically destroyed after the events, so didn't leave a lot of archaeological traces or appeared in other stories.
After Caesar's death, how would ordinary Romans have learned about the assassination? You're mentioning the guy who goes running to announce it, but I'm wondering if there were criers, public postings, or if it was simply a word of mouth network. Would it have happened the way that, Shakespeare has Antony cry havoc to the crowds? Would this have been the way it got announced in real life?
Again, this scene is most true.
Mostly true with a little bit of license. Yeah.
True. Yes. I mean, that's a good way to put it. So again, here sources are differing, and if we look into Appianus, he has more masses of people going here and there and killing people out of their emotional arousal. In other sources, Plutarch, again, mostly followed by Shakespeare, is again very careful indicating what people, how they think about communicating this event. And there are two strategies. The one is many people simply kept quiet in order to avoid that word of mouth is uncontrolled getting out, whereas others go to specific places to mobilize specific group of peoples where they hope for resonance of their message. So it's by way of word. There is a lot of reflection about also the use of written communication, which is so important in all the events leading up to this rather improvised killing on this Senate's meeting, because there was time pressure. Caesar was to leave Rome, so they had to be quick and improvise.
This next question comes from a patron of our show, William. William, thank you so much for submitting this question for today's show. William asks, how did Elizabethans receive the death of Caesar, given the tumultuous religious climate in England at the time, as well as the complicated environment of Elizabeth's reign, where typically depicting the overthrow of the powerful leader might not have gone over well in Elizabethan's court?
Yeah. We know that Shakespeare was careful with regard to political messages, because, that was a period, 40 years of reign of Elizabeth I, without successor, where people would be attentive to such matters, and politicians and the Queen would be very attentive to what people say and think about this. I think this twofold message of tyrannicide, a well-argued tyrannicide, is very clear, but also in Shakespeare, the message of Caesar, is a figure who could exert the clemencia, so be clemency towards people, who is not a bloody tyrant, just, killing this one, that one, but tries to keep up order, is also conveyed very clear. And the question of can order be upheld after such an event is so clearly discussed in the piece. So I think Shakespeare is looking towards his audience and trying to be careful to convey this double message of, that serious, very morally very serious people can consider and pursue tyrannicide. But it's also an extreme danger, a moral danger, because you also kill somebody who is a just king in a way, a just dictator, a clement dictator, and you create a situation where you cannot any longer control what people do. And again, the ancient sources are also, with very different accents, are pointing to be people being killed randomly, people being killed because their names were mixed up with other people. So, very careful careful communication here on this side, and I think, very careful listeners on the part of the audience.
From your work into this topic, if we're new to the Ides of March and the history behind Shakespeare's play Julius Caesar, and we want to explore it further, what are some additional resources you can recommend we use to learn more?
I mean, Caesar and Caesar's the killing of Caesar is one of the famous scenes from ancient history. So there is a large production of books. So I mean, allow me here, for listeners who are interested in the history of religion, what the Ides mean, and the whole business of divinization, which is going around this. I still can recommend my own book, Pantheon, here, which appeared 2018 in Princeton University Press, subtitled A New History of Roman Religion. And here the period of Caesar, the killing of Caesar, the divinization of Caesar is in a way right in the middle of the book, between the Republican and the imperial phase. What I can always recommend you, I mean, take a look. There are translations. Take a look at the sources. Read these few pages of Plutarch, read the few pages of Appianus, and read the one page of Suetonius in a translation, which gives you a very good image of what Shakespeare, on which small amount of textual data Shakespeare developed his drama.
Those are excellent resources. And if you're new to this part of history and some of these primary sources sound hard to spell or difficult to go and find on your own, make sure that you check out the show notes for today's episode. I'll have all of these primary sources linked there, where you can see the authors' names and their works and what they're called. So you'll have a good jumping off point for where to explore some of these works that talk about Caesar's death in a contemporary way. And of course, we'll have links to Jörg's book Pantheon there, so you can check out his work as well. So stay tuned for the URL for where to find those. Now, Jörg, we ask everyone this next question here at That Shakespeare Life, and that's, what's the one book you would take with you on a deserted island? My friends in England tell me I'm supposed to allow you the complete works of Shakespeare and a copy of the Bible, so your choice would be in addition to those.
Yeah, that is a question that you hear frequently being asked, and now I must perform my role as academic, saying, it's the question is much more interesting than the answer, and what you suggested also. I mean, the work of Shakespeare is enormous, and it's enjoyable. It's really thematizing a lot of foundational moral and political, social issues. So well worth reading. And if you add the Bible, I mean, again, this is not one single book, a monograph, but it's a collection of texts produced over about a millennium. And again, a lot of human experience is encoded there. So regarding my own choice, I remember that I was, very, very fond in my early youth reading Richard Francis Burton's Hajj to Mecca. And this fascinated me when I was about 12 years old. So a writer from the 19th century in hiding, going into this place. And for me, it opened up a very different religious worlds. I mean, when I was a student, I enjoyed very much Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose. Again, it's not about the single books, but rather, throughout life and in a biography, what is your favorite book is changing. And I think the question is supposing that I will be stuck on this island for the rest of my life. And so I must say I would prefer a whole library.
A whole library. Well, I guess that would work. I think that is an academic response, but as long as you're entertained there on your island, I guess it's a good choice. Well, what's next for you? What are you working on now that you're excited about?
I am right now working on and within a larger research group on the topic of religion and urbanity, and planning a book. I mean, it's actually revising this in the late manuscript stages with a working title of Gods and Cities. And my idea is to look into the role of religion for urbanization, if you like, for the rise of city, the way how large groups of people, face-to-face societies, far beyond the size of villages, can be kept together. And this is a comparative enterprise. So there are many stories to be told from the ancient Mesopotamian Uruk via 2nd millennium BCE, Indian, Chinese cities, if you think of ancient American developments. And of course, I'm not a specialist for many of them, so I need a lot of colleagues and have the help of many colleagues doing their own research on India, on medieval Europe, and so on. But this question, how religion shaped urban life, and vice versa, how urban life shaped religion, is extremely interesting, and I think is revealing in many, for me was revealing, and I hope in the end for my readers, is revealing in many instances. And by the way, theater is not the least point here. So rituals where you invite people, ask people, sometimes press people to sit together in one place, basically the whole in all inhabitants, grown up adult inhabitants of a place, to watch things being discussed on the stage, like tyrannicide. I mean, it's quite an exercise, and we see this in different cultures, ancient Greece, of course, but nearly contemporaneously in South Asia, in India, the so-called Sanskrit theater. And in both cases, it's religious rituals. And coming back to one of your questions, it's about you start this with a sacrifice, but you presume it's a good thing, so you don't have to check on dire omina like Caesar had to do.
Well, it sounds like you'll be exploring some really intricate and very tangible sections of history. I know we'll look forward to seeing what you uncover in that work. Thank you so much, Jörg Rüpke, for being our guest this week. This has been an interesting exploration into the history behind Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, and I know we're glad to finally understand what the Ides of March were from this play. Thank you so much for taking time today to join us and share this history with us today.
Thank you for the invitation and the question that provoked a lot of thinking on my side. Thank you.
Before you go, remember that membership to That Shakespeare Life is available on BOGO right now. That stands for Buy One, Give One. Sign up to be an annual member of That Shakespeare Life, and you can get a free annual membership to anyone of your choice. Get details and sign up today from the episode show notes at CassidyCash.com/episode 411. That's also where you can find more information on our guests this week, including clickable links to all the resources Jörg recommends for you if you want to dive into the deep end of history and find out all about the Ides of March. Find all these things at CassidyCash.com/episode 411. That's CassidyCash.com/EP411. That Shakespeare Life is researched and produced by me, Cassidy Cash. Our audio engineer is Gary Mayholm. That's it for this week. Thank you for listening. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to That Shakespeare Life. As always, the best conversations happen after the episode over at CassidyCash.com. Become a part of a vibrant Shakespeare conversation by adding your voice over at the website. Until next time, remember, when you want to know William Shakespeare, you have to go behind the curtain and into That Shakespeare Life.